Great is our God and mighty in power. Today we are going to look at two times that the Bible tells us that the earth will be harvested. One is in Revelation and the other one is in Matthew that Jesus tells us about himself. I've heard people say in the past that these are one and the same events, but we are going to compare the facts today and find out that they are not. And if you haven't watched my previous video concerning the two returns of Jesus, it may be beneficial for you to do that before you watch this video, because I go into more detail in that one concerning some of the things I'm going to cover today. But let's start out by reading about the harvest of the earth in Revelation 14 through 20. Now this passage can be divided up into two sections, with the first section being verses 14 through 16. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sharp sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. So in this section, there is someone like the Son of Man sitting on a cloud with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And an angel comes out and tells him to reap at the earth. And in verse 16, the earth is reaped. Now we don't find out in verse 16 who's reaped or where they go. But so we're going to leave the first group of people, we're just going to leave blank. But by the time we get through with this passage, we'll be able to tell who it is that's reaped in the first group. And let's start with verse 17. And notice that it says, and another angel. So these are not the same angel that's in the first group, first section of the passage. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had a sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered in the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. So the second time the earth is reaped in this passage, they're thrown into the wrath of God. So we know that that's the unsaved people are in this second group of people. So the first group of people that are reaped must be the saved people. And the verse 16 doesn't tell us where the saved people go, but we know that when we're reaped from this earth, we're going to be with Jesus. So where we're going to be is with Jesus. But it tells us that the second group that's reaped, the unsaved people, are going to be thrown directly into the wrath of God. And in my prior video, I do go into more detail about when the wrath of God is dispensed. So you may want to watch that one if you hadn't watched it already. So when does this harvest of the earth happen? It happens right at the time that the seventh trumpet is going to be blown. And so it's in the midst of the tribulation. It's not at the beginning, and it's not at the end, and it's definitely not before the tribulation. It's because the tribulation begins with seven seals being opened, and then we have the seven trumpets being blown, and then we have the seven bowls being poured out. So the trumpets are in the midst of the tribulation. That's how we know that this one is in the midst. Now that we figured out the who, where, and when of the Revelation harvest, let's turn over to Matthew and see about the harvest that Jesus tells us about in the parable of the wheat and tares. That's in Matthew 13, verses 24 through 30. And another parable he put forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while the men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householders came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servant said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Now the disciples had a hard time understanding this parable, so Jesus explained it to them in verses 36 through 43 of that same chapter. Then Jesus sent the multitude away and went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. And answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. I want to stop right here and point out in verses 39 and 40 that Jesus says this harvest is at the end of the world. So let's pick up in verse 41. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them that which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. So in this harvest, the tares are harvested first, which we find out in verse 38 are the children of the evil one. So they're the unsaved that are harvested first. And the saved that are left at the end of the time, they're not really harvested, but they are dealt with second. So we learned from this scripture that the unsaved are thrown directly into the fire. And the saved in this passage, they shine like the sun. And we learned in verse 30 that they are put into God's barn. So they are with we all at that time probably are with Jesus and God, all the saved people. And when does this one happen? There's no doubt about when this one happens. Jesus tells us twice that it's at the end of the age or the end of the world. So let's now compare these two. In Revelation, we have the saved being harvested first and the unsaved second. Whereas in Matthew, the unsaved are harvested first and the saved are harvested second. And in Revelation, the saved people goes right with Jesus, and the unsaved people goes into the right where the wrath of God is. And in Matthew, the unsaved, the first ones that are reaped, are thrown right into the fire, whereas the saved people shine like the sun and are put in the Father's barn. And of course in Revelation we learned that this one's in the midst of the tribulation, whereas in Matthew this is at the end of the world. So we see that they are two different events, and I hope that everybody's watching this, that when this harvest happens, that everyone watching this will be in this harvest and won't be left to the end of the world. I appreciate you so much watching this video, and I hope that you learned something and that you will subscribe to my channel. I'll be doing another video soon comparing 1 Corinthians 15, 51 through 52 to the seventh trumpet in Revelation to see if they are one and the same. Thank you again, and may God grant you peace in all the days ahead.